What's good, fam? Today we will learn how to use small brushes so we can make precise details in our work. I'm using Liquitex Basics Acrylic in titanium white and Mars black. I have a few different brushes to demo, but the main brush you need is a number 1 round liner. When it comes to working with small brushes, the most common mistake I see is to squeeze paint out of a tube and use it directly. Every paint has a different consistency, and this one comes out like toothpaste, which is not good for details. Another thing I see is to dip a dry brush into paint and cover the whole tip in paint. This could be useful for doing solid fills, but your brush will run out of paint quickly and you will have a lot of thick textures start to build up on your canvas, which will make shading harder later on. This is a number 5 round liner being loaded incorrectly for small details. I tried smaller brushes and kept getting similar sized marks. In order to get smaller details, mix water into your paint with the back of the brush so you don't fill your bristles up with paint. Dip your brush in water and squeeze the extra water out. Now that your paint is more fluid, you only need to dip the tip of the brush. Taking the time to set up your paint and load your paintbrush will help control how much paint comes off the brush. I'll pick up more paint this time, but still load just the tip or one side of the brush. Now my line is coming out smoothly and lasts longer, so I can do more without having to load the brush. You can see that as the paint runs out, the brush is still pushing water off the bristles. Now I will dip a smaller brush in water and squeeze the excess out. By squeezing a liner, I turn it into a mini flat brush. To go more in depth on flat brushes, check out my flat brush technique video. For now, notice how I only load one side of the flat brush. My brush is creating smaller lines and the water in the bristles is pushing the fluid paint off more efficiently. The less you have to reload, the more you can tap into the flow state of drawing your details. With the clean brush, I will load a small amount of paint. Fill in a shape, applying a little more pressure so the water pushes off all the paint in a single mark. I'm using this brush to demo because I see everyone grab the smallest brush they can for details, when in reality it's about loading the smallest amount of paint onto the brush. Every brush is different, so you have to make adjustments with how much paint you load, how fluid your paint is, how much water is in the brush, and how much pressure you apply, causing the water in the bristles to push the paint off smoothly. This stroke didn't have enough paint, so I will load twice as much and try again. The paint is coming off better, but the shortness of the bristles of this brush is not good for line-oriented details. It's better for tapping or dabbing organic textures and small shading. This next brush is the one I use the most for just about everything. It's a number 1 round liner that I squeeze into a flat shape so that it works like a micro flat brush, loading only one side of the brush at a time. The smaller you go with the brush, the trickier it is to feel the flex of the brush. Learning the pressure control for small brushes takes time because you have to learn how to be very light and graze the surface. A big difference between a pencil and a paintbrush is the lag. Your line is showing up a millisecond later and you can see the hairs of the brush bending. As you try and get smaller lines, you have to push less. Spirals are a great way to feel how the hairs of the brush twist and get wound up, forcing you to stay ahead of the curve using speed. I learned a lot of pressure control painting the top of my hand because your skin can feel the pressure you apply. Next, we are going to make micro lines. Squeeze your number 1 liner flat. You can try squeezing paint in with it to make it stay flat, but I usually don't have to do that. Only load one side of the brush. Touch the brush to the canvas ever so slightly, and once you touch it, slide your hand to the side, staying in line with the flat side like a knife cutting through bread. Here's a micro line compared to my first brush mark I made. Here's a line with the same brush but with a heavy hand. This is a resting hand creating a circle. When your brush is perpendicular to the canvas, the bristles can move in any direction. If the brush is at an angle, it can only move down and to the side. If you want to move up or in a circle, you have to go perpendicular. If you move up in this angle, the bristles will get messed up and the water won't push the paint off the brush as efficiently. Notice how the circle doesn't flow as nicely. This is pulling a line with a resting hand. This is a light touch. This is a heavy hand. The bigger the liner, the more spring it has, and it's easier to feel the flex when you pull lines. Now I will do a sliding pinky position with this number 5 round liner. Once you select the depth or pressure with your pinky, make sure your brush is perpendicular to the canvas so it can go any direction. Lock your hand position and slide it around. This technique is easier with the number 5 that has stronger bristles and more spring than the flimsy number 1. Sliding pinky is great because there is less chance of smudging wet paint and you can work different angles with it. Try a circle to feel the lag of the brush. Notice that I'm not smashing the brush down. If I take my pinky off, I can try a light touch with the free hand. This next exercise is for practicing lines with the resting hand. Draw 2 lines. Try splitting it in half with a 3rd line. Draw dots where a 4th and 5th line would go. Try your best to hit the target and commit to moving your hand in a line even if it misses. Draw dots anywhere and use the same starting point every time to train your hand to be able to draw in every direction. When you miss, immediately draw the correct line and you will find the magic. You will unlock lines by doing them in a row. Definitely practice this exercise with the pencil. Now we will do fast sliding hand lines. Practice sliding your hand in a quick motion, and when you're ready, touch the canvas with the brush. Don't change the shape of your hand at all and let it slide. Try and create parallel lines to this in succession. Take your time to touch the brush to the canvas, then move your hand quickly. You'll find precision by doing things in a row if you don't stop the flow. Draw a figure 8 with the resting hand to practice staying ahead of your brush. Right here, the brush slipped because it's no longer perpendicular to the canvas from this angle. This time, slide your hand and feel the pinky and palm in contact with the canvas. Use speed to stabilize your movement. A lot of my details are a simple shape that shrink or expand because it's fun to do them quickly in a row. I always do partial hexagons or spades. I like to create asymmetrical curves around my lines as well. Add more curves and play with the spacing between the lines. Drawing mandalas and learning ornamental tattoos was a big inspiration for my details. I love making sharp points with spades. Let's try some freehand marks with a bigger liner and load up the brush with a lot of wet paint. Draw an S mark that starts with a heavy hand and ends with a light touch. Here you can see the brush has plenty of water before I load it, and I twist the liner in the paint that's already mixed with water. Try and get a thick to thin line by changing pressure. Squeeze the liner into a flat and try angle marks with the sliding hand. With the flat liner, start by traveling in line with the edge for a skinny line and ending with a heavy hand. A calligraphy technique for cursive is to pull a heavy line down and a light line on the way up. This next pattern is ancient and has a lot of different meanings. One I resonate with is the symbol for enlightenment. Once you have the pattern, expand and let the feeling move on its own. Try making ovals from small to big with a sliding hand or a free hand. Now I will draw partial ellipses inside of this brush mark from my flat brush technique video. Start your liner on one side, then end in the middle. Repeat on the other side. I'm not holding the brush perpendicular to the canvas, so it will create an imperfection on the way up. Having this awareness is key to mastering the liner brush. Try tapping dots in a line and putting flow marks around them like energy wisps. Here's some more micro line tech. Squeeze your number 1 liner flat so we can create parallelograms with swift motions. Load one side with paint and flip the brush upside down so the paint side is on top. Always travel in line with the edge of your micro flat to create the smallest possible line. When I go to do angle lines on the end, I need to turn my hand so the brush follows that angle, and turn it back to do the original angle line. It's good to touch the palette in a new spot after loading so the initial line isn't a glob. Here is a resting hand micro line. I can tap this micro flat to create short micro squares. To shade these in, I will use my blown out number 1 round liner. This was once nice and sharp, but over time got left to dry out or dropped too many times, so I turned it into a smash brush. When the bristles of the brush are no longer perfect, the brush is a little more firm and works better for shading. Start by mixing 4 shades of gray on your palette plus white. This is a close-up of my smash brush I use for shading. Start with white, or if you're using color, use your lightest shade. I did a little finger smudging to start this gradient. Clean your brush before going to the next color and dry it with a towel. Put the next color in a space above it, filling a small piece with just that color. When I start to work in between, I like to have my brush perpendicular to the canvas. Seeing this up close, you can see how much the paint can really spread if your brush is dry but the paint is wet. Acrylics dry quickly, so you have to move color to color in sequence, waiting for the paint to dry before adding a second layer. This style of shading came from me learning with pencil first to have perfectly spaced lines, drawing them really fast in one direction. Dry brush with wet paint is great for this method. When you block in the next shade, keep your color separate at first, then work between the 2 colors, never going back to the pure color without cleaning your brush first. I added too much black on my brush and wiped some off above it so I could dry brush in between the 2 shades. Add more white once the first layer has dried so it sits on top. Another method to shade is to use a lot of water and pull a single mark with a heavy hand so the brush runs out of paint at the end, creating a gradient in one stroke. A lot of my details are inspired by freestyle calligraphy brushstrokes. It's all the same. I love putting details inside my brushstrokes as well. This is a hexagon variation traveling along the edge of the mark. Adding a second row of these with the shading underneath is a really nice complement to the mark. Small and big dots are a great ornamental detail. I did these rows of dots with dark to light shade and it really popped. Real time is really slow because this detail is so small. If I was working on a larger scale, I could do this much faster. That's why all my paintings are 4 feet wide on average. This next detail is a lot more wavy. The magic of this pattern is all about the spacing and traveling close to the curve and then far from the curve in succession. It feels nice when you do it. My brush is flat and tilted back, so I have to pull the same direction every time. To do this last part, I had to flip my hand to the other side to continue. This next detail is inspired by tire tread patterns. I learned to make them starting with dashed lines and building angled lines off them. I found a spot for a classic mandala petal, and I tried to make the petal have thicker lines in the base, ending with sharp lines for the tip. Adding more curved lines to this jellyfish creature, playing with the spacing technique from before. I saved the hardest for last, hoping you will have become familiar with the liner brush. Give it a little outline and break up the curve with lines, always traveling in line with your flattened liner brush. I'm going to draw mini octagons inside this curved brush mark. Place small triangles by tapping the micro flat brush in the corners. I will use this technique to build the entire structure. Completing the outline in real time so you can experience my level of calm. Now I will place octagons inside this frame. I truly believe that learning the liner brush is one ability, but to be able to find patience and joy from something so tedious is another world that will come from realizing that art is just a practice like meditation, and you can learn to coexist with your thoughts of anxiety or being overwhelmed by a task, and it will reflect in other parts of your life. Here's an octagon in real time. I turn my hand and brush every time to create every angle of the octagon. With this knowledge, you should be able to transfer your designs from drawing to painting. It took me a while to learn, but now I don't have to think about it. Thanks for painting with me, and I'll see you in the next video.